I'm sorry. I can't afford this date. The words tore from her throat, a choked whisper wrapped in shame. The glittering chandeliers of the restaurant seemed to dim, the soft murmur of other diners turning into a roaring judgment in her ears. But what he did next changed everything. Before we find out what happened, tell me, have you ever felt like you were in a place you didn't belong? Press that like button if you know the feeling, and let's begin our story. Zara felt the weight of the moment press down on her, a physical force that made it hard to breathe. The man sitting across from her, Gene, had been nothing but a perfect gentleman all evening. His smile was easy, his eyes kind, and he had listened, truly listened, when she spoke about her mundane job at the administrative office, making it sound far more interesting than it was. But the entire time, a frantic, screaming voice in her head had been doing the math. The appetizer prices alone were more than her weekly grocery budget. The bottle of wine he'd ordered without a second thought could have paid her electric bill. She had agreed to this date, flattered by his attention and captivated by his quiet confidence, telling herself she deserved a night of fantasy. But reality was a cruel accountant, and the bill, now lying innocently on the pristine white tablecloth, was its final ledger. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of panic. She had exactly $73 in her bank account until her next paycheck, most of which was already mentally allocated to the money she needed to send her mother for a dental emergency. A smile that felt plastic and brittle was stretched across her face. She'd hoped he would just pay, that the awkward dance of who pays for what would be sidestepped by his clear affluence. But he had let the bill sit there, a silent invitation, and she felt the walls of her carefully constructed composure begin to crumble. She couldn't play this game. She couldn't pretend to be someone she wasn't, a woman who could casually split a $300 dinner bill. The pretense was too heavy, and her shoulders, already burdened by the weight of 2 jobs and endless family obligations, could no longer bear it. So she broke. The tears came first, hot and stinging, blurring the crystal water glasses into shimmering blobs. Then came the confession, a torrent of humiliation she couldn't hold back. "I'm so sorry," she repeated, her voice cracking. "I should have said something sooner. This place. It's beautiful, but I can't." Zara squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable wave of condescension or pity. She expected a polite, dismissive smile, a quick and efficient payment, followed by an awkward, silent walk to the door where they would part ways forever. She would be just a story, he told his friends later, the girl who couldn't afford the date. But the reaction she was prepared for never came. Instead of a shift in his posture or a sigh of annoyance, there was only a profound silence. When she dared to peek through her tear-soaked lashes, she saw Jean looking at her with an expression she couldn't decipher. It wasn't pity. It wasn't anger. It was something softer, closer to understanding. He didn't say a word. Slowly, deliberately, he reached across the table. His fingers, long and elegant, brushed against the leather billfold. He picked it up, opened it, and placed his own credit card inside without so much as a glance at the total. The action was so simple, so devoid of drama or condescension, that it stunned her into silence. The roaring in her ears subsided. He closed the folder and placed it at the edge of the table for the waiter. Only then did he meet her gaze again, and a small, genuine smile touched his lips. "It's okay," he said, his voice a low, calming rumble. "Honestly, I'm just relieved. I was terrified you were going to order the lobster." The gentle humor in his tone was a lifeline. A small, watery laugh escaped her lips, half sob, half relief. He had not only saved her from humiliation, but he had also given her the gift of shared laughter, turning a moment of intense shame into a secret between them. "I saw it on the menu," she admitted, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I think my heart stopped for a second. He leaned forward, his elbows on the table, creating an intimate space just for the two of them. "This place," he said, gesturing vaguely at the opulent surroundings, "it's all for show. It's about sending a message, not about enjoying a meal. The truth is, I'd rather be at a noodle shop with good kimchi and a loud ajumma yelling at the cooks." His confession hung in the air, a mirror to her own. He too was playing a part. This persona, the man who could effortlessly belong in a place like this, was a costume. For the first time all evening, Zara felt like she was seeing the real Jean, not the impressive figure she had built up in her mind. He saw her, not as a charity case, but as a person who was honest. And in his eyes, she saw not a wealthy patron, but a man who understood the suffocating pressure of appearances. The waiter returned, and the transaction was completed with a quiet efficiency that felt worlds away from the emotional turmoil of the preceding moments. The wall between them, built from her insecurity and his impressive facade, had been shattered by one simple, vulnerable truth. They left the restaurant, stepping out into the cool night air. The city lights seemed brighter, the sounds of traffic less jarring. The oppressive weight that had been crushing Zara's chest was gone, replaced by a lightness she hadn't felt in years. She felt seen. She felt safe. Jean turned to her, a thoughtful expression on his face. "The night is still young," he said. "And I still owe you a proper dinner. Are you interested in that noodle shop I mentioned?" A real, unburdened smile spread across her face. "I would love that," she said, and she meant it more than she'd meant anything all day. They walked for several blocks, leaving the glittering high-rises and designer storefronts behind. The streets grew narrower, the buildings more lived in. He led her to a small, unassuming restaurant tucked between a laundromat and a convenience store. The windows were steamy, and the smell of rich broth and garlic spilled out onto the sidewalk. Inside, it was the complete opposite of the first restaurant. It was loud, warm, and wonderfully chaotic. An elderly woman with a kind, wrinkled face shouted a greeting at Jean from behind the counter, and he bowed respectfully, calling her Imo, Auntie. The sterile silence was replaced by the clatter of chopsticks and the happy chatter of families sharing a meal. They sat at a small wooden table, and Jean ordered for them both in fluent Korean, a rapid-fire exchange with the owner that ended in a shared laugh. Minutes later, 2 huge, steaming bowls of soup were placed before them, filled with chewy noodles, savory broth, and perfectly spiced kimchi. It was the most delicious thing Zara had ever tasted. Here, in this cozy, authentic space, the conversation flowed effortlessly. She found herself telling him everything about her dream of leaving her data entry job to become a freelance graphic designer, about the small apartment she could barely afford, about the constant worry for her family back home, and the pressure she felt to be their safety net. He didn't just listen, he absorbed her words, his gaze never leaving her face. He, in turn, opened up in a way that felt deeply personal. He told her about his daughter, Mina, who is 7 years old and the center of his universe. He spoke of his own business, a logistics software startup he was building from the ground up. "It sounds impressive," he admitted with a self-deprecating shrug, "but right now it's mostly just me, my laptop, and a lot of sleepless nights fueled by instant coffee." It's an all-or-nothing gamble. They were 2 people on a precipice, balancing their dreams against the harsh realities of rent and responsibility. The connection they forged over that simple bowl of noodles was more real and profound than anything a $300 meal could have ever bought. In the weeks that followed, their relationship blossomed in the soil of that shared honesty. Their dates were a map of the city's best-kept, low-cost secrets, long walks along the river, afternoons spent in a free art museum where Zara would sketch the sculptures while Jean watched, evenings spent in his small apartment attempting to cook together, usually ending in laughter and a call for pizza. Each moment was simple, yet deeply meaningful. They were building a world together founded not on what they had, but on who they were. One sunny Saturday, Jean asked her to meet him at the park. There was a nervous energy about him she hadn't seen before. "There's someone I'd like you to meet," he'd said on the phone, and she knew instantly who he meant. Her heart fluttered with a mix of excitement and anxiety. Meeting Mina felt like a monumental step, a test she desperately wanted to pass. She worried all morning. What if his daughter didn't like her? What if she said the wrong thing? Children were brutally honest, and Zara feared Mina would see all the insecurities she tried so hard to hide. She found Jean near the playground, and standing half-hidden behind his legs was a little girl with big, curious eyes and 2 pigtails that bounced when she moved. This was Mina. Mina, this is my friend, Zara. Jean said gently, his hand resting on his daughter's shoulder. Mina offered a shy, one-shouldered shrug and burrowed her face deeper into her father's jeans. Zara's heart went out to her. Instead of pushing or trying too hard, she simply gave the little girl a warm smile and then sat down on a nearby bench. She pulled out the small sketchbook and pencil she always carried with her. She didn't look at Mina, but she was acutely aware of the little girl watching her. She began to draw, her pencil scratching lightly against the paper. She sketched the fountain in the center of the park, then a cartoonish-looking squirrel chasing a nut. After a few minutes, a small shadow fell over her sketchbook. Mina had crept over, her curiosity winning out over her shyness. "What are you drawing?" she whispered. "Just a silly squirrel," Zara whispered back, not looking up. "He looks like he's late for a very important meeting," Mina giggled, a bright, bubbly sound. She pointed a small finger at the page. "Can you draw a cat? A magical one with wings." Zara's smile widened. "I think I can manage that." As she drew, they talked. Jean watched them from a short distance away, a look of profound relief and tenderness on his face. This was more than he could have hoped for. After Zara had finished the magical flying cat, Mina looked up at her, her expression serious. "My dad talks about you," she said, her voice clear as a bell. "He smiles when he says your name." Everything felt perfect, almost too perfect. A small, insidious voice in the back of Zara's mind began to whisper that this kind of happiness couldn't last. It was a fear born from a lifetime of waiting for the other shoe to drop. The seed of doubt was planted not by Jean, but by her cousin, Maya, who she'd been helping with rent for months. Maya worked as a waitress in the city's industrial district and had called Zara one evening, her voice a mixture of concern and conspiratorial excitement. "You're not going to believe who I saw tonight," Maya had said. "Your guy, Jean." She described seeing him late at night, in the alley behind her restaurant. He wasn't alone. He was with two men in dark suits who looked, in Maya's words, like they collect debts for a living. She'd watched as Jean handed one of them a thick, heavy-looking briefcase. The exchange was quick, quiet, and deeply unsettling. "Everyone around here knows him," Maya warned. "They don't call him Mr. Kim. They call him the chairman. They say he runs things. You need to be careful." Zara had defended him instantly, her voice sharper than she intended. "He owns a tech startup, Maya. You don't know what you're talking about," but the words, "the chairman," echoed in her mind. A cold dread began to seep into her bones. She started noticing things she'd previously ignored or dismissed. The way Jean was always vague about the specifics of his business partners, referring to them only as investors, the way he often paid for things in cash, peeling bills from a thick wad he kept in his pocket. The cryptic phone calls he would take, walking into another room and speaking in low, clipped Korean. All of his actions, once seen through the lens of a struggling entrepreneur, now took on a sinister new meaning. Her memory flashed back to their first date, to that impossibly expensive restaurant. How could a man running an all-or-nothing startup afford a place like that so easily? The pieces began to click into place, forming a picture she didn't want to see. Was his story about financial strain just another facade, a different kind of lie to test her? The trust she had cherished, the foundation of their entire relationship, began to feel like quicksand. She didn't confront him. She didn't know how. Instead, a chasm of silence opened between them. She began to pull away, her texts becoming shorter, her excuses for not seeing him more frequent. Jean could feel her slipping away, and the confusion and hurt were evident in his eyes. He thought it was him. He thought that perhaps the reality of dating a single father, a man with so much baggage and so little to offer, had finally become too much for her. The misunderstanding festered, a silent poison tainting the most honest connection she had ever known. The silence from her end was a tangible thing, a cold fog rolling between them, obscuring the warmth they had so carefully cultivated. Jean felt it in the way she would take hours to respond to a text that would have once earned an instant reply. He saw it in the flicker of something unreadable in her eyes when he'd pick her up, an emotion that looked painfully like fear. He had replayed every moment they'd spent together, searching for his misstep. Was it the pressure of his life, of Mina? Had he been too forward or not forward enough? The not knowing was an agony, a slow-grinding torment that was far worse than any outright rejection. He decided he couldn't live in the ambiguity any longer. He deserved the truth, and more importantly, she deserved the chance to give it. He asked her to meet him at the park, the same one where she had first met Mina. It felt like a lifetime ago. When she arrived, she looked pale and drawn, her usual vibrant energy muted. They sat on the bench, the laughter of children on the playground a stark contrast to the heavy quiet between them. Finally, Gene broke it, his voice laced with a vulnerability that mirrored hers on their first date. "Zara," he began, turning to face her fully. "I feel you pulling away from me. If I've done something, or if this is just too much, please just tell me." The silence is harder than the truth. Whatever it is, her gaze fell to her hands, twisting in her lap. The dam of her fear finally broke. "I know," she whispered, the words barely audible. "I know who you are," he frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" She finally looked at him, her eyes filled with a terrifying cocktail of fear and accusation. "My cousin saw you in an alley late at night with those men. She told me what they call you." She took a shaky breath. "They call you the chairman." The name landed in the space between them with the force of a physical blow. Jin's face went through a rapid series of transformations. First, utter confusion, then a dawning, horrified understanding, and finally, a deep, profound hurt that seemed to extinguish the light in his eyes. That she could believe this of him, that the woman who had shown him such profound empathy could think he was a monster. It was a betrayal deeper than any he could have imagined. "The chairman," he repeated, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. "That's what you think of me? That I'm some kind of gangster?" He let out a harsh, humorless laugh. "After everything? After I told you about my dreams, about Mina?" He stood up, pacing in front of the bench, his hands running through his hair in agitation. "You think my struggle is a lie? That it's all some elaborate act?" He stopped and looked down at her, his voice dropping to a pained whisper. "I thought you saw me, Zara. I really thought you did." A cold, hard knot of shame tightened in Zara's stomach. Hearing the raw pain in his voice, seeing the genuine devastation on his face, she realized how monstrous her assumption had been. But the fear, fed by Maya's dramatic story and her own deep-seated anxieties, had been too powerful. He sat back down, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a weary resignation. He looked not at her, but at the fountain, his gaze distant. "That name," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "I haven't heard it in years. It's not mine. It was my father's." The story came out in a slow, painful torrent. His father had been a man of immense pride but poor judgment, a small business owner who had fallen into gambling. When his legitimate lines of credit dried up, he turned to loan sharks, borrowing an astronomical sum he could never hope to repay. They had given him the mockingly respectful title of the chairman as they slowly bled him dry. When his father passed away from a heart attack, the debt, along with its crushing interest, passed to Jean. "Those men you saw," he continued, his voice heavy with the weight of the memory, "they weren't my employees. They were my inheritance. They came to me after the funeral and made it clear. The debt was now mine. If I didn't pay, they would take my father's business, our family home where my mother still lived. They implied they knew I had a daughter." He finally turned to look at her, and she saw the haunted look of a man who had been living in a private hell. "So I paid. For 5 years. Every spare dollar I've ever made has gone to them. The startup isn't just a dream, Zara. It's my only way out. My only chance to build something clean, something that can finally free my family, free Mina, from his shadow." He reached into his wallet and pulled out a worn, folded piece of paper. It was a receipt. The briefcase Maya saw. That was the last payment. It was everything I had. I sold my father's old car. I emptied my savings. It was the final installment on a nightmare I thought would never end. He looked at her, his expression not angry, but exhausted. "I kept it from you because I was ashamed. I didn't want this. This ugliness to touch you or Mina. I didn't want you to look at me and see my father's mistakes. But I see now that by trying to protect you, I just pushed you away. I let you believe the worst. The truth washed over Zara, cleansing the fear but leaving behind a thick residue of guilt. She had taken his quiet strength for something sinister, his private burdens for a dark secret. He wasn't a criminal. He was a man of profound honor, sacrificing his own present for his family's future. He had been carrying this impossible weight alone, all while trying to build a new life and be a good father. Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they were not for herself. They were for him. For the sleepless nights he must have spent worrying, for the shame he carried that was never his to bear, for the loneliness of his struggle. She reached out and placed her hand over his. His skin was cold. "Jean," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion.
I am so sorry.
"I should have trusted you. I should have come to you. I should have asked. It was my own fear that got in the way. Can you ever forgive me?" He looked down at her hand on his, and a long, shuddering breath escaped him. It was the sound of a man letting go of a burden he had carried for far too long. He turned his hand over and laced his fingers through hers, his grip tight, anchoring. "There's nothing to forgive," he said, his voice softer now. "You were scared. I understand. I couldn't bear the thought of losing you over a lie." She moved closer on the bench, closing the distance between them. "You're not going to lose me," she said with a fierce certainty that surprised them both. "You're the most decent, honorable man I have ever met. You've been carrying all of this by yourself, but you don't have to anymore." Not anymore. In that moment, something shifted between them. The fragile, budding romance, threatened by misunderstanding, was now being reforged in the fires of absolute truth. It was stronger, deeper, and more resilient than before. She saw him not as a perfect, untouchable man, but as a flawed, beautifully human person who had faced down his demons with quiet courage. And he saw in her partner someone who wasn't afraid of his scars, who didn't run from the ugliness of the past, but who chose to stay and hold his hand through it. He leaned his forehead against hers, closing his eyes. "I love you, Zara," he murmured, the confession a release of every pent-up emotion. She brought her other hand up to cup his cheek. "I love you, too, Jean," she replied, her own confession sealing the promise that his struggle was now their struggle. Their future, whatever it held, was something they would build together. A year and a half passed, a period of quiet, steady construction. The final payment to the loan sharks had been a true liberation. A cloud had lifted from Jin's life, and the change was visible. The persistent tension in his shoulders eased, and his laughter became more frequent and free. His startup, no longer starved for every last penny, began to thrive. He secured a legitimate round of seed funding from a venture capital firm that believed in his vision, allowing him to hire a small team and move out of his cramped apartment into a proper office. Zara, in turn, found her own wings. Bolstered by Jin's unwavering belief in her talent, she finally quit her soul-crushing administrative job. She started her freelance graphic design business, and fueled by late nights and a passion she'd long suppressed, she began to land clients. Her income was inconsistent at first, but it was hers, earned on her own terms. Their lives intertwined seamlessly. They were a team in every sense of the word. She would help him with branding for his startup, and he would help her with the accounting for her business. They navigated the challenges of co-parenting Mina, who adored Zara and had started calling her Auntie Z. Their home was filled with the easy chaos of family life. Crayons scattered on the coffee table, the smell of Zara's slightly burnt cooking attempts mingling with the aroma of Jin's perfectly made kimchi stew, and the sound of Mina's laughter echoing through the halls. One crisp autumn evening, Jean told Zara he wanted to take her out. No reason, he said, just because. He took her back to the little noodle shop, the place where their story had truly begun. The same kind-faced Ajumma greeted them like family, bustling over to pinch Mina's cheeks and bring them their usual order without even asking. The air was thick with the comforting smell of broth and the warm chatter of other diners. After they had finished their meal and Mina was happily doodling on a napkin, Jean reached across the table, his expression a mixture of love and nervousness. He took Zara's hand. "Do you remember our first date?" he asked, his voice low. She smiled. "The disastrous one or the perfect one?" He chuckled. "Both. At that first restaurant, I was trying to be someone I wasn't. I was trying to impress you with money I didn't really have, in a place I didn't even like. And here is where I felt like myself for the first time. You let me be myself." He slid out of the booth and knelt on one knee on the worn linoleum floor. The restaurant's chatter seemed to fade into a low hum. He pulled a small, simple box from his pocket. It wasn't fancy, but it was clear he had chosen it with care. "Zara, you came into my life and showed me that vulnerability isn't weakness. You taught me that true wealth has nothing to do with a bank account. It's about honesty, trust, and having a partner to share the burdens with. You are my partner in everything. I don't want to spend another day of my life without you by my side. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Zara's face as she nodded, unable to speak. "Yes," she finally managed to whisper, a sound filled with all the love and relief and joy of their entire journey. "Yes, of course, yes." Jean slid a delicate, beautiful ring onto her finger as a smattering of applause broke out from the other diners who had been watching the scene unfold. The elderly owner beamed from behind the counter, wiping a tear from her eye with the corner of her apron. Mina, seeing her father and Zara hugging, scrambled over and wrapped her small arms around both of them, creating a perfect, unbreakable circle of family. Their wedding was a reflection of their love story, simple, authentic, and full of heart. They exchanged vows not in a grand cathedral, but at a small city hall ceremony, with only their closest friends, Zara's mother who had flown in for the occasion, and a beaming Mina as their flower girl. The reception was held at the noodle shop. The owner had insisted, closing down for the evening and helping them decorate the space with simple white lanterns and strings of lights. There were no caterers or fancy DJs, just mountains of delicious food, laughter that filled the cozy space, and a playlist of their favorite songs playing from a small speaker in the corner. Jin's vows were a testament to her grace. He spoke of how she had taught him the meaning of partnership, how she had faced the ugliest parts of his past with courage and love, and how seeing the world through her eyes had made everything brighter. Zara's vows were a testament to his honor. She spoke of how he had shown her that a man's worth was in his character, not his wallet, and how his quiet strength and unwavering devotion to his family had made her a better person. Later that evening, after the guests had left and a sleepy Mina had been put to bed, Jean and Zara stood outside the shop, looking at their reflections in the darkened window. She rested her head on his shoulder, his arm wrapped securely around her. In the glass, she saw not the anxious, insecure woman from that first date, but a confident, happy wife. And beside her stood not a man hiding behind a facade, but her husband, his face open and filled with a deep, settled contentment. They had built this, not with money or status, but with something far more valuable: the courage to be vulnerable, the strength to be honest, and the unwavering belief that love could be a safe harbor in any storm. He had not been a mafia boss, but he had fought battles she couldn't imagine. And she had not needed a rescuer, but she had found a partner who saw her worth when she couldn't see it herself. They had saved each other, not from financial ruin, but from loneliness. Their real love story began not with a fancy dinner, but with an honest confession. What started as a moment of shame became the foundation for a lifetime of joy. And if their story teaches us anything, it's that the bravest thing we can ever do is show someone our true selves, imperfections and all. Thank you for watching. If their journey moved you, please share this story and subscribe for more tales that warm the heart.